Good evening, and welcome to the August program from our St. Paul, Learn with the League. Most months on the last Tuesday of the month, the St. Paul League of Women Voters hosts an engaging discussion around topics of interest to our communities. This evening's presentation is the first in a three-part series on equity and accessibility in voting. We will discuss physical barriers to the polls tonight. My name is Cheryl Bailey, and I'm a board member of the St. Paul League and a member of the program committee. I'm so pleased to host tonight's event. This series, Equity and Accessibility in Voting, sheds light on specific voting problems our friends and neighbors encounter. The League's policy is that the act of casting a ballot should be as easy as possible for every eligible voter. In each of this three-part series, we invite members of the community to tell their voting stories and give a face and a personal touch to the issues people can experience just trying to vote. We also call on them to offer solutions from their perspectives. On September 28th, we will examine language and culture and learn how those affect accessibility. And the program on October 26th will address youth and Generation Z as a block of voters often overlooked in the voting process. Be sure to note those dates on your calendar and watch your email for more information. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan membership organization dedicated to improving our government and engaging all citizens in the decisions which affect our lives. The St. Paul League is one of more than 800 leagues across the US, bringing nonpartisan advocacy, education, and empowerment to the local level. If you're not currently a league member, we invite you to join and help in the efforts to strengthen our democracy. Tonight's program is co-sponsored by the Roseville area chapter. Thanks, Roseville, for your support of this event. And we also want to thank the St. Paul Neighborhood Network and SCCTV for carrying this program to their viewers. We appreciate your steadfast involvement with the League of Women Voters St. Paul. Before we begin, we'll acknowledge that we're learning on the ancestral homeland of the Dakota, Minnesota, and the current home of many Native nations, including the Dakota and Ojibwe. Tonight's program is being recorded and broadcast on Zoom and Facebook Live. We welcome you to put your questions in the comments section for Facebook and the Q&A feature found on the bottom of your screen for Zoom. We will get to as many questions as possible at the end of the discussion. Secretary of State Steve Simon reminds us that the first ballot in Minnesota in 1863 was written in 4 languages. Our state from the very beginning has considered the diversity of its citizens in various ways. This is a current screenshot of the Secretary of State's website. You can see the many languages listed across the top: Spanish, Hmong, Somali, many more. And you can notice the vote by mail prompt on the left. We'll mention this option throughout tonight's presentation as an excellent way and voting method for some with physical challenges in exercising their right to vote. Minnesota has enacted various regulations to promote access to the polls. You can read the details here. You need at least one wide door, at least one parking space close to the accessible entrance, a sign directing people to that entrance, and if there are stairs that are required for entering the polling place, there have to be temporary ramps and handrails there. Here's a key point, quote, "A local official can only choose polling places that meet these standards unless no available place within a precinct is accessible or can be made accessible," end quote. We're here tonight to talk about these regulations. If a polling location can't be made accessible, what are the options for people with mobility issues? And if voting by mail is made more burdensome, people with physical barriers to the polls may find voting difficult or even impossible. The state monitors and reports compliance. And unfortunately, Minnesota's rate of minus 19.5% is the highest disability gap in voter turnout in the country. Our 2 panelists tonight will help us learn how we can do better. The right to vote is the most powerful participatory tool that citizens have. We're asked to be active participants in the machinery of the US government. For many citizens, this is not as easy as simply walking to the local school to grab a pen, stand at a booth, read the names, and fill in a circle. People who are blind, for instance, have the right to have an auto mark machine at their polling place, which allows them to mark their ballot with the same privacy, unaided, that every other citizen expects. We'll share some resources for the blind in our chat and urge everyone to check out a wonderful video developed by the National Federation of the Blind Minnesota called The Blind Voter Experience. This is on their website and on YouTube. The min.gov website also has resources for the blind voter, as does a dynamic group in Minneapolis called Blind Inc., which teaches blind people about finding a polling place, exercising their right to vote, and how to use the voting machines. Tonight, we'll hear from two extraordinary women who want to share their experiences as they have exercised their franchise to vote. Please join me in welcoming our presenters, Marion McCarthy and Nikki Villavicencio. Marion McCarthy is a long-term member of the League of Women Voters and even served as president of the Detroit chapter, where she lived and raised a large family. She graduated from the University of Detroit and obtained her Master's of Social Work from Wayne State University. Marion worked for more than 10 years as a liaison for people recently sent home from the hospital. Ms. McCarthy lives in an independent portion of a large senior housing complex. Balance and strength are her concerns, and Ms. McCarthy uses a walker to get around. She depends on family, friends, and metro mobility for transportation, and inclement weather can be a barrier. Nikki has heavy involvement and often leadership roles in the Maplewood North End Work Group, the Maplewood Parks and Recreation Commission, the Home Care Workers Training and Orientation Committee, and the Olmsted Academy. She is the vice chair of the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee. Most recently, Ms. Villavicencio became the chair of Minnesota Council on Disabilities and was elected to the Maplewood City Council. I lost my video for just a moment. Sorry about that. Marion, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. One of the icebreakers we use in the League of Women Voters in collections and organizations when we have meetings is to ask people what their recollection of their first time that they ever voted. Would you share for viewers what your memory is of the first time you voted?
I'd be delighted to do so because I have very fond memories of those days. As Cheryl has mentioned, I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, and the state of Michigan requires that you pre-register to vote versus what it does in Minnesota here. And you have to pre-register 35 days before the actual voting date itself. And at that point, we're talking 60 years ago, I hopped on a bus and went downtown to the city hall, which I was required to do, and go in there and raise my right hand, put my left on a Bible, and swear that the information I provided for them to register was accurate and true. I was so thrilled. I can still remember the thrill of going through this process. And I've carried it through all these many years since. So if we kind of like fast forward, we go now to when about 15 years ago, I had back surgery, which left me where I'm using a cane for a few years, and then I'm back onto a walker, which has changed, which has put a dent into my ability to get to the polls as I had done previously. Uh, a good example is the first thing that hits you is that it's difficult for me to open a door, especially an outside door, which is very heavy. And with a walker in front of me, trying to pull the door open, which is heavy, bracing the walker to try to brace the door, etc., etc. It's really quite a monumentous task. It's the things that you don't even think about when, normally. And after you get inside, or even how did I get to the door in the first place? would be transportation. And at one point, I used to drive myself, so that wasn't an issue. But I gave up driving a few years ago, and so I had to rely, like Cheryl said, on friends or Metro Mobility. And I wish to inform the viewers how fortunate we are that we do live in Minnesota, because Metro Mobility works 7 days a week, almost 20 hours a day. Whereas in Detroit, where I was, it only worked 5 days and it quit at 9 o'clock at night. So I was never able to go to.
You know, I think we've lost Marion. I wonder if we could go to Nikki, and I'm sure Marion will come right back on. I'm sorry, I was staring at the screen for a moment because I thought maybe it was my internet. There's our friend Nikki. Nikki, welcome and thank you for coming and talking to us about your life issues and how you ended up as an advocate for people with disabilities. Do you mind sharing with us your first voting experience? What do you remember about voting for the first time?
Yes, and thank you for having me. And I know technology is great when it works, so I'm glad to jump in. My first time voting was in 2004, actually. I was in college at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. I grew up in Wisconsin and in a small town, and it was John Kerry versus Bush, and Bush was up for re-election. And me being in college, I was like the typical young college student, very excited about voting. I remember there was literally lines of students at the polls. Local pizza places were bringing pizza to the line for the students to make sure they stayed in line. And it was a really positive energy. And at the time I was not into politics at all, surprisingly. I was a video production student, and politics were not really in my scope of what I thought that I was going to end up in. So it's really interesting to go back to those thoughts of what had happened in 2004. But I was super excited. I actually got to meet John Kerry's daughter. She came to my college, and I met her, and it was really impactful in my life and politics in general. It really made me connected to what was going on.
Do you mind sharing with us your use of a wheelchair and how that came about, and what your experience being in a wheelchair has had with voting access?
Yes, definitely. So I was born with a disability. It's a rare condition called arthrogryposis. And it's a condition that limits my use of my arms mostly, but all my joints are fixed or difficult to flex to move the joint. And I use my feet for everything. I write with my feet, I eat with my feet, I type and use my phone. I take care of my daughter, and I use a wheelchair to get around. And voting has always been a passion of mine, and making sure that other folks with disabilities get to vote is very important to me. And in fact, people, I think the biggest barrier is to just not knowing your rights around limited mobilities, and getting to the polls or how to vote is really the key factor. So I really appreciate being here with you, and any wisdom I can share with how to get more folks with all abilities involved in voting, I will do for the rest of my life.
Do you think privacy and being able to independently cast your vote has ever been an issue? Do the polling booths that are set aside for people with disabilities adequate, in your opinion? Have things improved so that you feel like you can, on your own, independently cast your vote in privacy?
Yeah, that's a really interesting, it's a really interesting question, because So I loved your information about the auto mark at the beginning. In fact, my partner is also disabled. He uses the auto mark every time he votes, and he does it because he has a physical disability. And you know, that's the thing that I really want to emphasize around getting folks engaged in voting with disabilities, is that people with disabilities are in all other cultural groups and religious groups and nationalities and everything, where disability is such an intersectional idea. And so, you know, using the auto mark is also helpful for people who English is not their first language. And so it's really important that if we go to our polling place to see, is the auto mark visible? Because sometimes if folks don't see it, you know, if they can use it, they don't know that they can use it. And yes, sometimes privacy can be an issue because of where it's placed. And so, you know, the people who set up the election space need to be very cognizant of where they place it, and you know, the right heights and levels, and if there is privacy. Another aspect of privacy that can be important to discuss is engaging folks with developmental disabilities. Most people do not understand that everybody gets to vote unless a judge says explicitly you cannot because of some issue that happened. So people with developmental disabilities are very capable of voting, and we should be actively engaging them in their right to vote. And sometimes that privacy may look differently. And so we need to, you know, just be aware of that.
Yeah, one of the people working at the state resources for the blind said it was just the most amazing sensation to be able to vote independently the first time when he used that machine, the AutoMark machine, in his polling place, because prior to that, he'd had to have other people mark his ballot. And as everyone can imagine, number one, if you can't see the ballot, you can't prove that they did that. And they may not have done that on purpose, or they may have, and they may have done it incorrectly. And you have no way to verify that what you wanted to, the person you wanted to vote for, you actually voted for. The second thing he remembered was years ago in other states, especially his experience was he couldn't, if someone was going to mark his ballot for him, it had to be two people, not one person going into the booth. It had to be both parties, a member of both parties. And he said this was in the day when you had to walk in and pull a screen. So all three of us are crammed into this little tiny spot so that it's confirmed that the person I said I wanted to mark was marked. What he commented on is anyone who uses the AutoMark, the paper, the size of the ballot is a different size from the rest of the ballots. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but he said that is one way your name's not on it, but people could see that you were a person with disabilities if you were using the AutoMark. But for him, that was a very small item compared to just being able to use that machine. Nikki, I had one question about terminology. What would you say are effective words, are respectful words when we talk about people with disabilities? And if you care to, you could tell us also which words you'd rather we not use.
Sure, definitely. So obviously, you know, people with disabilities are not one, you know, uniform group that only uses one type of language. So it does vary, but I can give you general ideas of words that most people are acceptable by. Like, so people with disabilities, I think it's generally great to just always use person first language instead of disability first language. Now, there are folks in the disability community that will identify, such as myself, as a disabled person, but it's important to understand that not everybody identifies as a person with a disability, but they still may need all the services or supports that a person who identifies as a disability or a senior needs. So for instance, we don't typically use the word handicapped because it means, it comes actually from the Depression era, and it means that you have your hand out, like you're looking for a handout. And that's been, you know, a really big barrier for folks in the disability community to have equity in our community, because so many people just think that disabled people are in the community to be served instead of serve. And that was one of my driving forces to run for office, actually, is to turn that narrative into knowing that people with disabilities have a great purpose in our communities, and we all can learn from each other. Also, another word obviously we don't use is cripple. Again, there are folks in the disability community that use that word, but typically non-disabled people should not use that word. It also comes from the medical model of old being in institutions, and it's just a very negative connotation to the word. So physically disabled, people with disabilities, and then at worst case scenario, you just ask the person what words do they prefer.
Thank you for
Does that make sense?
Yep, I think that helps. How about voting booths itself? Have you noticed in your voting career improvements in Minnesota? You said you'd voted in Wisconsin too. Have you noticed any steps back that we've taken that just are remarkable to you?
Yeah, let me think here. So, obviously I'm fairly young still, so I didn't have to deal with a lot of the harshness of folks before me, and having not even being able to, even roll up in, a lot of people don't understand that you can actually go in your car and have somebody bring out a ballot to you if you're not able to get inside. And I'm a big advocate for obviously the mail-in votes. So I think that one of the great benefits that I have seen improvement in the last few years is a push for mail-in ballots, because and no excuse voting, has really improved and encouraged, families, busy people, and people with disabilities and seniors.
Yeah, when I was speaking to the advocates for the blind at Blind Inc., and also at the State Department, they pointed out for blind people, mail-in ballots don't work well. Anything with paper and pen is difficult, but voting from home would be ideal, especially in a pandemic, if it were electronic, because there are all sorts of adaptations with laptops and phones that make people who are blind able to interact with electronic medium. And the blind community has been working for quite some time with the state, with the Secretary of State, to try and get exclusively electronic mail-in voting from home. And that would be a fantastic thing if we could keep pushing for that. That would be one of the advocacy things that they asked us to mention tonight, is to let them know that being able to do this electronically for a blind person would be fabulous. They can ask family members to fill it in, but as you know, the mail-in balloting can be a little tricky, and you have to do everything exactly right, or your vote doesn't get counted, and you have to be able to check on the website to see if your vote has gone through. So another question we were wondering was if your role now in government has taught you different things about your role formerly as community organizer. What can you tell us about that? Because you have been just a absolutely A1 advocate for people with disabilities, and now you're sort of in the government trying to make those things happen. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what it's like being on city council?
Yeah, sure. So I'm like super new. I just started in January. I was elected in the last election. And so I still have a huge learning curve, but I've been enjoying the work so far. And yes, it is definitely a change from going from advocate / activist to elected. So outside, inside. is definitely different, but the way I see myself within the community hasn't changed too much, in the sense that I look at myself as, now that I'm elected, I I can be that bridge between community and government, because I understand government programs at a very at a very deep level, and I understand the difficulties that everyday people deal with. I'm a young mother, and like I said, I have a disability, and so I very involved in my community in all sorts of ways, and so I really try to just be the voice of my community, and be a good listener.
Nikki, we have a question from the audience wondering what clicked in you to get involved in politics? You were mentioned in college, it wasn't really your cup of tea. Was it that visit with the candidate's daughter, or was it something else that spurred you on to thinking, I think I want to be a player in this field?
Yeah, so I would say it wasn't quite that. It was more of a longer journey. So when I came to Minnesota, I would say Minnesota very activated my political muscles. I first started interning at Gillette Lifetime Clinic, which is part of Gillette Children's Hospital. And I did an internship where I created an advocacy group where I would help other folks with disabilities tell their story, and then go share that with their legislator or other electeds, and try to influence public policy for folks with disabilities. And the biggest gap that I saw, that I thought I could have a good influence on in politics, was the fact that the quality of life that people with disabilities were living wasn't the same as their peers. So at the time, I was like a 24-year-old young person, and I had all the same desires as many disabled people do, as their able-bodied counterpart, but I didn't have the same opportunities, and neither did my disabled peers, as just being a young person. And I wanted to change that. And so then when I started advocating at the Capitol, I realized very quickly that the policymakers have to really be on board with like how disabled people live their lives, their actual lives. I mean, there's been a lot of policies and programs that have been created, but then aren't very practical for people. So I saw that there really needed to be somebody who understood from a very basic level, and I also worked for the Secretary of State when Obama was president. I did some outreach with them, and part of my thing was to tell other disabled folks what their rights were around voting, and engaging them. We were talking about the mail-in ballots. I think a huge way that we all in the community can kind of help others make sure they get their ballot in correctly is, if we help people get a mail-in ballot, we should help them come back and make sure it's all put in, which is a lot of work, organizing work, but it's so beneficial. I have done a lot of door knocking and canvassing in apartment buildings specifically. We call it accessible door knocking. And it is one of the most wonderful things I've ever done in politics, because we always increase the voter turnout, and we get people excited about politics because they've never, ever, ever been asked to get involved. And so, yeah.
Part of what we wanted to accomplish tonight and in the rest of the series is to just give a face to people who are everywhere, like you said. I mean, the quotes we had talked about before the piece were that about 3 million people in the United States are wheelchair dependent. That doesn't even count the other millions of people who use walkers and braces and have other mobility issues. There are about 1 million people who consider themselves blind in the United States. And I think you had mentioned the usual quote is about 30% of people have some type of disability, even if they don't necessarily identify as a person with a disability. Can you talk about how you're in the community and yet you're not being seen in the same way as a voting bloc, as a financial bloc, as a force to be reckoned with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the issue that you mentioned is one of the major barriers is that not everybody who is disabled identifies as disabled. So it's hard to, do the same sort of research as other cultural groups and in general, ableisms or prejudices that exist in our society. But yeah, so can you repeat that last part of it? Sorry about that.
Just trying to think of how we can, as viewers, start realizing that the disabled are all around us. We may be one. We may
sure.
be a disabled person, and how can we put our efforts forward, and remembering that there's a reason the curb cutouts are being put in on our street, and it's a nuisance when the road is ripped up, but there's a reason for that, and there's a reason to advocate for funding of federal programs that say you have to have these things and then don't pay. And the state said that there was really a big issue now with these machines that help people who are blind vote, but they're very old and they're you can't purchase them anymore, and they're going to be difficult to repair. So funding is always an issue to run against.
Yes, definitely. I think that, like I said, people with disabilities are the intersectional culture of every culture. And so, we need to make, we being us all as a community, need to make efforts to dive into all different communities and make sure that, so for instance, I have worked in the Hmong community. And so the needs of a person with a disability in the Hmong community are going to be different than other, a white disabled person. And so, one of the things that when I was part of the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, we did is we had rides to the polls. So making sure that people in our neighborhoods have a way to get to the polls or get to vote. I also use Metro Mobility and the city bus and light rail, and those aspects are incredibly important. Also, too, I am a lover of voting in general, so it should be like a national holiday. I think that would make it a lot easier for folks to vote of all abilities. And, and in the disability community, we have a saying that if you're not part of our community now, you may be fortunate enough to be in our community someday. So, even if you don't think that the curb cuts help you right now, or that city bus going by your house, it doesn't help you right now, when you're retired and don't want to drive, or you can't do as much as you could before, you know what? You may be very thankful for all those things. So definitely, it affects us all so much, and kids too. So many accessibility features help families and children too.
Hear, hear. I think we're going to riff on the transportation thing and see if we can have Ms. McCarthy come back. Is there any way to get Marion on too? And then Nikki, I'll have you come back and we'll talk about specific action items if you can think of anything that you'd like to offer for us. Marion, thank you. I think we lost you, and then I was staring at my screen thinking maybe it was me. So thanks and welcome aboard again. And we were talking about transportation for you. You were mentioning that Metro Mobility was a little bit better here than when you had been living in Detroit. Can you tell us the other ways you get around and what you have to do with your walker and how that's affected your voting?
Well, as I said, it's I use Metro or Friends, and when I have friends come to pick me up, I have to worry if they're physically able to lift the walker and put it in the trunk, because uh, my friends usually are older, as I am, on the whole, and it's also you feel like you're always asking somebody to help you out. And the other thing too is that where you go sometimes, like if you go to a restaurant, the tables are very close together, and you have to ask people to move their chairs and things like that to walk around. But to get back to the voting thing, sort of thing, is that there are areas there, like when I was able to do this independently, I just walked up to the polls, stood in line. If there was a presidential, you usually had to stand in line for a while, go in and vote and leave and not think twice about it. Well, now I have to consider many things as I go into the polls. And one is, do I have to stand in line? I can't stand an hour. I can't stand 20 minutes, really, to speak of. So that's a big issue right there. And then the other thing is that to get to the ballot, to uh, the place where you actually do the voting, you have to stand, to check it off. And there again, I worry about falling. So it's all these little things that you don't think about when you're healthy and strong, because you just take things automatically.
Marion, what about mail-in voting? That's just been a blessing for you, I think. Can you talk viewers through when do you remember when you started using mail-in voting? And
Yes, yes, I started using it while I was in Detroit, and it's a godsend. That's all I can tell you. It's a godsend because the beauty of it is that you call up and you request a ballot to be sent to you, an application, I should say, to be sent to you, which they do, and then you fill out the application, send it back, and then they will mail you the ballot. And it's usually, this is several weeks before the election itself because you have to allow time. This is very important now because the mails aren't working as smoothly as they used to, that you allow sufficient time for it to get through the mail in time to, by the election. So when you get it in the mail in ballot, you can set it, and that's the other beauty of mail-in ballots that you don't have when you go to the polls, is that you have the ballot in front of you and you can study it and look at it and check out these candidates, and without being rushed with thinking of the people back waiting to get into the booth, and you can look up the resumes of the people and check them out, and makes do you know your sheriffs? Are you familiar with the sheriffs when you have to choose one? Or what about there must be 20 judges that run, sort of thing. Oh, who knows about all these judges? So that's the beauty. You can do all the studying and then check out the resumes and complete your ballot, and feeling that you've done a very thorough job of voting.
I had never thought about it until you and I had spoken about what a luxury that is to be able to look and study your ballot. I had known that the Secretary of State's website, you could look, you could even request a sample ballot, but life is busy. I think for people to try to think of that ahead of time is just an extra step that a lot of people are not going to do. And so being able to have your ballot and think about it before you mail it in. And you're right,
I
we have to
think,
do all those steps correctly.
yeah, I think there might be a possibility of getting a sample ballot online too,
Yeah,
possibly.
probably can.
Yeah.
Marion, you'd ask that we make sure we get the phone number. So I'll read it and then we can maybe put it on the chat. But
Yeah,
the
sure.
phone number for Ramsey County to request an absentee ballot
Yeah.
is 651-266-2171.
That is
And
correct.
that's the Ramsey County absentee ballot request phone number.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
that's helpful. We appreciate that.
And
Marion,
another, yeah,
well, you live with a lot of people who walk around and move fine. You also see people who have more significant disabilities. Have you talked to your friends and neighbors at all? Do you think anyone has not voted just because the effort is just physically so cumbersome?
no, in fact, if anything, I live in the Episcopal Home Complex. I think they've done a lot to try to make it easy for us to get to the polls. Now they have a bus here that will take the people that are able to get, to go there by bus so that you don't have to worry about transportation and everything like that. But there's a disability for me because I don't know how long I might have to stand and things like that. So I choose that not to. And then there's some that are in the wheelchairs are really almost bedbound in a sense, with disabilities. But it doesn't mean that they can't, they're not unable to vote. And
Right.
so the mail-in is a godsend for people such as that also. Uh, but I have not encountered anybody that's met difficulties. I'm not aware of it. Let's put it this way. And I figure there's about 500 people living in this complex. I figure probably about 200 maybe use mail-in ballots, considering where they're, which how apartment building they're living in, if they're in assisted living or if they're in a nursing home and stuff like that.
Can you tell us what it was like when you had a house full of kids? You have over 10 kids that you were raising. Were you able to get away on that specific Tuesday and vote when there was, maybe you had a very ordered and organized house? Mine is not, and I only have two. So how did you vote when you were a young mom, a stay-at-home mom? Oh, I might have lost, looks like Marion might have frozen. My thoughts go back to what Nikki had been talking about, making it a national holiday, and I wonder if that could be one of the action committees, because being able to get away on a specific date does not always work for people. I think we might have lost Marion. I wonder if we could go back to Nikki and Nikki's live. And then Nikki, while we're getting you organized, I wanted to remind people again, the video that is called The Blind Voter Experience. It is on YouTube. It was developed, I think it's the Minnesota section of the Federation for the National Federation of the Blind Minnesota. And it is so compelling. It is just chilling to hear some of the people recall what it was like to vote independently and privately for the first time. They said it felt like freedom and was exhilarating. So that's another recommendation. It's the first YouTube video that will come up, The Blind Voter Experience on YouTube. Marion, we have you back. Were you able to tell us a little bit about what it's like having a house full of kids and trying to get away on that one Tuesday? Were you able to always do that? Was there ever a time where you just literally couldn't get out of the house?
No, I never experienced that, to tell you the truth, because to us voting was very, very important, so we made arrangements one way or another. And then
Yeah.
as the children, the firstborn got older, they could watch the younger children also, where I'd feel freer to go during the day or something to that extent. Yeah.
And you said you raised them so well that they have spread out to every state.
Yes, they do. I have one even living in Japan, which I want to tell you, he uses mail-in voting.
Okay.
And he has been voting now. He's lived there for about 25 years, and he's voted in every presidential election there is. Yeah, as a result of the mail-in ability. And we have to think of that with their soldiers and stuff too. Remember?
Right. Right. They've been using remote ballots, and so as many of the states in the West have been using it exclusively for
That's
a number of
Four
elections.
states. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. I wonder if we could have, Marion, did you have any other comments that you wanted to make about your
Yes,
experience?
John Lewis, God bless him, he always said that voting was precious and sacred, and I think we should all keep that in mind. It is precious and it is sacred. You up there?
I think Cheryl might have frozen. So I can get started with some questions for you guys while we wait for her to come back. Thank you all for bearing with us with all of our technology questions. Oh, Cheryl's back.
I'm back. I don't know how long I've been gone.
Not very long. Cheryl, take it away with questions.
Nikki, how was it when you were raising a little one who was just an infant? Were you able to get out okay? And could you get to the voting booth? I find little kids can be a real, not a burden, but a difficulty when you're trying to stand in line and vote.
It definitely could be. Luckily, I have only one child, and voting for us is definitely like a national holiday. So I have always taken her right along with me, and she is 9 now, and she's growing up to understand the importance of it.
Question for either panelist. We're looking for improvements that we should still be looking to make in accessibility. Physical improvements of polling places. Have you been in some that are great? What's your ideal version of the perfect polling place if you use a walker, if you have a wheelchair, if you just can't stand for long times? Are there any things that you have seen that just would be so helpful and good if you could have them?
Well, first, I like to say that we need to make sure that all our polling places are by city bus stops, because that really helps. As we've talked, a lot of disabled folks and seniors use public transportation. Obviously, the ideal place would be like, no barriers, no steps, no any of those type of things. But we have to work with the communities that we have available, and they have to be in all different precincts. But just a lot of times I've noticed, so a lot of times they're in churches, right? And what I've noticed is churches have multiple doors a lot of times. And so I think making sure that there's adequate signage when you're driving into the parking lot, at the doors, making sure that if you're at the wrong door, it says to go to which door, making sure that the door, if it is in like a lot of times those older buildings like churches, they sometimes don't have the button to open the door. So if there is not a button, then you got to make sure you prop up the door, open the door. And, obviously we vote in November, so sometimes it can be cold, but then, if it's really cold, I don't know, maybe look for somebody to, have a door person to look for people to open the door. Those are all very important things. Like we mentioned before, the privacy. So making sure that the auto mark or any other accessible location that you have, where people can vote, it has adequate space. And, the U.S. Access Board has a lot of advice on space, public space places, but you want the ability to have a wheelchair to be able to kind of go in a circle, is what I always think of it as. That gives you enough space. And a lot of times you can think of it in bathrooms are always the good example of not having enough space. A lot of times, how many times have we all been in a bathroom and you're like, this is not nearly enough space. So, voting is similar, right? You want to be able to like turn all the way around. And then you want to have space to have another person with you, like a personal care attendant or a family person or a friend, to also assist you if necessary. I mean, those are some of the major things. Are there any maybe other questions or specifics?
Yeah, one of the viewers is an election judge and saying that her assigned polling place is very small. The question says, it's a challenge to set up the auto mark and provide enough space around it for privacy and accessibility purposes. What are your thoughts on combined polling places? And that is a limitation. If the Secretary of State's office is supposed to only choose places that can be made accessible, And do you have any advice for that election judge if she can contact someone? Do you have any contacts at the Secretary of State's office, or a recommendation for what the process should be to say, give the feedback that, boy, we've done this for a few years and it's not working well for our patient or our clients who are coming in, the citizens who are coming in to vote?
Yeah, that can be an issue. And I have worked with folks on those issues. And the difficult part of that is choosing polling locations happen way before the actual election. So we kind of have to talk to our local electeds. I don't have a particular individual to point to, but I would say that even contacting the Ramsey, or if you're in Ramsey County, your county elections place, and your locals, your city council members, you can talk to them about, so for instance, I know sometimes if it's possible, it's nice to have a polling place within a senior building, or a building that has a lot of people with low income. Because then they're just right there. They don't have to go outside. They don't have to put their coat on, and they can just come in. Now, the difficulties or obstacles around that is security. A lot of times management of senior buildings may not want to have people of the public just being able to come in willy-nilly when you have, senior citizens who may or may not, have the ability to go outside. But I think there should be some sort of happy medium around finding places, especially in the Twin Cities. I feel like there are so many viable places that we could, and space is a very big factor. So I would definitely encourage folks to reach out to their local officials and advocate for changing polling locations if possible.
One viewer mentioned a good thing that I think she's sort of answered her own question. If we see something when we go to vote that could be improved, should we mention it to an election judge? What are your thoughts on that, either you or Marion? Here comes Marion.
Yeah.
Marion, you want to take it?
Yeah, that's the only way that they're going to know that there's a problem, is that it's brought to their attention, and that see if there's anything they can do to correct it. It might be out of their control, but at least they're aware that that they might not have even thought that it was a problem.
And then one
Yeah.
question asked if there were ways to make voters voting easier for people who are blind. And I would say from the people I have spoken to, their mission is exactly as you talked about, Nikki, that blind people are simply blind. They are people who are blind, and they want to live all sorts of different lives, and their blindness is just one part of it. And they would like to be able to vote independently and privately. And that means that election judges have to make sure that those machines are working. So even in their video, they do a little role play of what a person can do. And if you want to change blindness to using a wheelchair or having a brace on your leg or not being able to stand, to actually ask the election judge, can you fix the machine? And they show the election judge saying, oh, well, it's really difficult to do. And then them quietly saying, but there is a federal regulation that I'm supposed to be able to vote, and that's my legal right to be able to vote. So could you look into it? And the election judge can call the Secretary of State's office. There are numbers that they can call for troubleshooting. I should have had one of those numbers tonight for everybody's internet access. I should have had a call a friend number.
Yeah, definitely. I was just going to add that too. Though the election judges have all the correct numbers to call if the auto mark isn't working, or you don't see it, or it's not in an accessible space. But also too, I wish there is a national number too that people can call to report anything that's illegal happening at a polling place too. I think it's through the ACLU. Does that sound right? ACLU, yeah, I think so. Anyways, yeah.
Nikki, we are getting questions about the auto mark, and I have a very rudimentary understanding of what it is. Do you have any better understanding? Have you ever used the auto mark?
Yes, I have.
Can you explain to viewers what that is, what happens when you get that paper and how you mark your ballot?
So it's like, imagine like a old computer. Remember the first old computers? That's what it kind of looks like, or an ATM. And you slide the paper in, and then so if you're blind, you can put on headphones and it will say it to you. Or if your English is not your first language, it will say it to you in your language. Otherwise, if you are not blind, you can also read it on the screen. And you can change the font size, so making it larger or smaller. And you can go back too and change your ballot, if you haven't printed it out yet anyways, and you can go back like, oh wait, did I do that one right? You can look back, which is really nice, takes your time. Let me see. And then, so once it's marked, then it prints it out. And it's filled in, like the little rectangle is filled in like with ink, obviously, perfectly.
So it can read the ballot to you if you're having vision issues, or you can mark it yourself, but you'll tell it on the screen, and then the computer will mark it perfectly for you and cast the ballot. And do you put the ballot in yourself? Do you bring that out then and put it into the machine where everyone else is using, or is that in the auto mark?
Nope. So then it prints it out, and then you put it in the machine.
In the regular machine.
Yep. And there is a privacy sleeve in case you do need assistance in putting it in. Because, like, for instance, myself, sometimes I can't reach it.
Yeah.
And so there is a sleeve to put your ballot in, and you can have an election judge or your friend or family member put it in there for you.
Well, we've reached 7:59. I think we're going to have to call it an evening, but I just can't thank you both enough, Marion and Nikki, for putting up with our internet issues and popping in and out. It was just a great pleasure. And I'm just going to let everyone know that these are all recorded on our St. Paul League of Women Voters Facebook site, and you can see them on our YouTube channel. We offer these events on the last Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. And the next program on September 28th is Equity and Accessibility at the Polls, Language and Culture. Be sure to sign up for our email to receive the details. If you'd like to watch any of our past programs, please check those out on our website. You'll receive a brief survey about future topics. We'd love to hear if you have any other ideas, and please let us know what you thought of this presentation. Be gentle. And thank you again to Marion McCarthy and Nikki Villavicencio, our animated and delightful presenters. We also thank the program committee, the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, and SCC TV for broadcasting tonight's event. Finally, from the Roseville League and from the St. Paul League, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful night.